Thank you very much. I now call on Humza Yousaf to conclude the debate. Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, before I start the substance of my speech, let me say that we will be voting for both the Labour and Green amendments. In relation to the Green amendment, let me just reiterate what my colleague Christina McKelvey and indeed what Patrick Harvey have already said, that we urge people to protest using digital means and other methods which do not include mass gatherings outdoors. Let me also say to the number of members who address the issue of hate crime data and having disaggregated data, that I agree with the point that you make. I raised it and had a good discussion with BMIS and some other racial equality organisations recently. If it wasn't for the pandemic, this month would have seen some work on that being put forward and brought forward by Police Scotland, and I'll re-engage with Police Scotland about when we can bring forward disaggregated data, because the points that have been made about data, having information, are hugely, hugely important. Presiding Officer, I will start this speech and end it in the same way, to say that I'm angry. I'm angry that in 2020 we're once again confronted with scenes of horrific racial injustice. I'm angry that in 2020 we're still dealing with overt racism, with subtle racism, with institutional racism, with structural racism. Whichever form it takes, it is still racism. You may well think that as time has moved on, that racism has declined, that manifestations of overt racism are no longer commonplace. I'm afraid that's not the case, Presiding Officer. I don't have to cast my mind back particularly far. I suspect the same is true for Anas, to somebody calling me a Paki. Don't even start me on my Twitter timeline, which is frankly a cesspit of racism. I'm angry, Presiding Officer, because in this day and age, we're still telling people of colour to go home. Brian Whittle, what I thought was a really excellent contribution, says that he remembers a time in a bygone era when he would see casual racism on the TV. He doesn't have to go back to a bygone era, Presiding Officer. I heard it just yesterday. I saw a video clip yesterday of the social commentator and author Afua Hirsch on a panel chaired by LBC's Nick Ferrari. She explained her views of needing to confront the racism of figures in British history. And Nick Ferrari's response was, if you don't like Britain, which is her home, why do you stay? He would simply not have asked that question if a white person was sitting in the chair. But people of colour are still fair game when it comes to racism. Forget the racial jibes. Forget the slurs that we still have to put up with. Racism is literally killing minorities, as we have all seen and we have all referenced. But as everybody has mentioned, racism doesn't just exist in the United States. The events in the United States force us to hold a mirror up to ourselves and to confront the racism that exists here. The unconscious, the subtle, the overt, the institutional, the structural. On all of these fronts, Scotland is not immune. Presiding Officer, this is the part where we should all begin to feel uncomfortable, because we have to accept the reality and the evidence in front of us that Scotland has a problem of structural racism. As people have mentioned, take this Parliament as an example. Over 300 MSPs have come and gone out of this Parliament, our nation's Parliament, and in 20 years, not a single black member of the Scottish Parliament. Our shame. Not a single female woman of colour, to our shame. And the only 4 ethnic minority MSPs have all been Scots Asian males. And take Anas and I, we're hardly even diverse between us. Both male, both born and raised in Glasgow's South Side, both in our mid-30s, both went to the same private school, both middle class. Our fathers even come from the same region in Pakistan. His father happens to be the governor of that region. My dad didn't quite get there. The Conservatives, the Greens, the Liberal Democrats, they've never had a single person of colour make up their ranks in 20 years of devolution. I don't say that to point the finger. I say that because you know we have to make change. They've never had a single MP from Scotland that has been non-white in their history. And to my colleagues on the government bench, we know that we are not immune either. Some people were surprised. They were taken aback even by the mention on my social media that 99% of the meetings I go to, I'm the only non-white person in the room. But why are we so surprised when the most senior positions in Scotland are filled almost exclusively by those who are white? Take my portfolio alone. The Lord President, white. The Lord Justice Clerk, white. Every High Court judge, white. The Lord Advocate, white. The Solicitor General, white. The Chief Constable, white. Every Deputy Chief Constable, white. Every Assistant Chief Constable, white. The Head of the Law Society, white. The Head of the Faculty of Advocates, white. Every Prison Governor, white. And not just Justice. The Chief Medical Officer, white. The Chief Nursing Officer, white. The Chief Veterinary Officer, white. The Chief Social Work Advisor, white. Almost every trade union in this country headed by people who are white. In the Scottish Government, every Director General is white. Every chair of every public body is white. That is not good enough. I don't doubt that if I looked across the private sector, that black and minority ethnic people would similarly be underrepresented at senior levels. This is a collective failure on every single one of us. So I hope we're sitting uncomfortably.